Hey there, Twins fans. How are you this fine and lovely evening? My name is Seth Stohs of Twins Daily, twinsdaily.com. A special kind of bonus episode of Twins Spotlight tonight, in which I will be talking a little bit about the book that I've helped kind of put together here. Half of a tag team, and we'll bring in the other half in a second. The Minnesota Twins top 60 Twins players in 60 seasons in Minnesota. Obviously, the 2020 season was the 60th season of the team's history, and we've got a guy here who has been ranking the top 300 Twins. Yes, 300 Twins for the last 10 years. So we'll talk a little bit with him. Just real quick, at Twins Daily, there's article. There'll be more articles throughout the week, next couple of weeks, where you can get links to ordering this book. But it's just $7.99 for the ebook. And hey, let's bring him in. And his name is Chris Talley, and he has been doing this for about 10 years. So let's kind of walk through a little bit. First, Chris, introduce yourself a little bit. What gave you the idea for ranking 300 Minnesota Twins players?
Yeah, the obsession, I guess. Huh? So, hello, I'm Chris Talley. I kind of came up with the idea, goes back 15 years or so, when Aaron Gleeman started doing his top 40 ranking, and he was kind of dragging him out, doing an article every 3 or 4 days. So I tried to start guessing where his list was going to go. And as I got to 40, I realized there's not much of a difference between 41 and 31. So I made my own list that went to 50, and then it went to 150. And eventually it settled at 300, and I update the list every year and try and throw it online somewhere. And Seth reached out and said, hey, let's put something together here for 60 years and 60 Twins.
Yeah, I mean, it's a list that I've been looking forward to after every season. I've been in a couple of radio shows today and talked a lot about it and how I look forward to it after every season to see how the current Twins moved up your rankings, and maybe some of those guys that fell off beyond 300. One of those guys being, I believe, Pat Mahomes this year. So
Yep.
Just that name is a lot of fun. I mean, even if some of these guys that are at the bottom of this list aren't great, they can certainly bring back memories. So in the next step here, let's talk a little bit about how you've gone about doing this. And let's start with some of the factors that go into how you rank a player. And before we do that, I want to just remind people, we got a lot of people listening live right now. Feel free to send us comments, questions for myself, for Chris. Ask us to compare and contrast a couple of players. We'll be happy to kind of do that throughout the night. We've got a few examples of conversations. I personally believe this is an ebook, but it's kind of like a coffee table book where hopefully you'll be able to have conversations with your dad or your grandpa or your granddaughter or whatever it is, or you think about these types of things, and it creates a lot of good memories. So with that, feel free to send us questions, whether you're watching us live on Twins Daily Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, wherever you're watching this. We'll be happy to answer those. Hopefully this is an enjoyable half hour, 45 minutes, I guess, whatever amount of time we're here. So, Chris, let's talk through it. The first thing that you mentioned, and we'll kind of go through these briefly one by one, but just in 10 seconds, I think longevity is just how long were they with the Twins?
Yep. And that's, seasons plus, not all seasons are created equal. Were they full-time for that season, or were they a cup of coffee for 10 at-bats?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a fair point. It's also 2020 might be a little bit different than, 2019, 60-game season. So let's talk a little bit peak value. I think that, again, speaks for itself. How long did the guy play at a very high level?
Right. You got guys like Justin Morneau, who had really great peak values and MVPs and MVP runner-ups. And how many years were they at that level? Harmon Killebrew was at there for like a decade. Morneau might have only been there a couple of years, that kind of thing.
For sure. Did they lead the team? And I put these slides together fairly quickly. Did they lead the team in OPS and wins and saves and home runs? I think being a team leader a lot of those years is an important factor.
Yep. And there's some under the radar guys like Doug Corbett, who might have been on some terrible teams, but he might have led the team in WAR one year, in 81.
Yeah, another great example. And you'll have to see, again, in this book, not only are we doing profiles on the top 30, which we'll give you an example here in a second. I'm sorry, on the top 60. We're going to give you the whole list of 300, and it's going to, I bet you Doug Corbett's somewhere in that list. You'll be interested to see where he is. And again, a reminder, go to Twins Daily. There's links in an article I wrote to where you can order this. Again, just $7.99. Post-season heroics. I think for you and I, this may be where we differ a little bit in some of our rankings. The value of, a game in the postseason compared to a game in the regular season, or 7 games in a postseason versus 162 in a regular season.
Yep, and I'm definitely a believer in flags fly forever, and Minnesotans don't have a whole lot to hang their hat on, but 87 and 91 can't take those away from us. So, guys that stepped up big time there, they made an impact, and even guys who had big performances in 65, even if it was in a losing effort, I gave them some decent bumps.
Yeah, I know the bottom on this list is team success. Now, that may not necessarily translate into World Series championships or that kind of thing, but, we're the end division winners and that kind of thing. We'll quickly go over the other ones: awards, statistical achievements, honors, awards being a Gold Glove, MVP, Cy Young, statistical achievements. Obviously, Rod Carew won a few batting titles. So did Joe Mauer. So did Kirby Puckett. He won one. ERA champions, Alan Anderson. There's a name we should remember. Was he in the top 60? Probably not. But that's something I should have shown you this slide. Chris sent me an example, an Excel sheet. It's got multiple worksheets within it, and each one has just name after name. And you see these charts, and you see these columns, and you see the number of categories that Harmon Killebrew led the league or led his team in. It's really an impressive thing. So. All-star appearances. I think that's one, Chris, and disagree with me if you mean it's something different, but how they were viewed at their time. Were they viewed at that time as an all-star caliber player, as an MVP guy who gets a lot of votes? Or, Bert Blyleven's an example, a guy that wasn't in a lot of all-star games, and that might have hurt him as it related to taking so long to get to the Hall of Fame.
Yep, definitely. And I might disagree with an all-star choice or MVP votes for, current left fielder the last couple of years, but they still got those votes. They still got that recognition. So I kind of took that under consideration.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think that kind of takes away it being just statistics driven. I mean, we could use Baseball Reference WAR or Fangraphs WAR or, some of the WARP or VORP or, some of those stats and just make a list based on what that tells us. But this is a little bit more fun. So again, one example, I just pulled one out of the 60 profiles out. I happened to pick number 32, Larry Heisel, who was with the Twins for 5 seasons. Kind of had been in the minor leagues the year before he came to the Twins, and then he had some good seasons, and then just an absolutely fantastic 1977 season. So real quickly to walk through here, we've got his information, his birth date, where he ranks, his stats just with the Twins. This is all it's just about the Twins. He was with the Twins for 5 seasons and played in 662 games. So I wrote up the profile here. In this case, it's a shorter profile. The top 30's got full pages. The 31 through 60 we gave half pages. So the first 30 are a little bit deeper than this. Walking through here, we also shared what we felt was his best season with the Twins. To kind of talk again, 1977 in this case at 302, 36 doubles, 28 home runs, led the league with 119 RBI, played an all-star game, and then he left after the season, which, oh well. And then we have a Did You Know? And just for every player, it's just kind of something beyond just the normal stuff that you would read. It's maybe stuff you already did know, maybe not. And then Chris's comments, what put him into that ranking and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think that's a good example. You'll notice there's hyperlinks. There's hyperlinks throughout the entire document for every player. For instance, Bob Allison is known for his diving catch in the 1965 World Series down the left field line. I have that linked to the YouTube video where you can go watch that. And we've got articles and different things linked to in each of these articles. So, again, a reminder, if you do have any questions, comments, any topics you'd like us to just kind of talk through, because you don't want to hear me talk, you want to hear Chris talk more. So real quickly, let's talk through our top 10. Chris, you put yours in there. You had your list already set up when you sent it to me, so I could put it together into a document. And then after doing all the research and reading everything and kind of following your thinking, I created my own top 60. I didn't go to 300. Didn't do that. And I put that at the back of the book. But, I think top 10, I wanted to include that here because I don't think there's a whole lot of controversial. Are you like me? 1 through 3, in my opinion, you could put any of those 3 in there at number 1, and I probably won't argue too vehemently. For you, what was it about Killebrew?
Well, growing up in the Puckett era, it was definitely hard for me not to slide Kirby into number 1, as he was the hero for everybody our age. But, diving into some, longevity, Killebrew played a little bit more. Killebrew was a little more dominant. Puckett, really, it was the postseason is where he stood apart. His regular season stats were, to be honest, they were less than Killebrew, and they were less than even Carew. I have him at number 2, mostly buoyed by the World Series in both 87 and 91 and the ALCS. But Harmon, with that power, I think you put in the book about how much higher he is than everybody else in home runs. Hrbek is second, but he's like almost
180, 200, something like that.
The RBI is the same, and OPS is similar. The only guys that are even comparable are guys like Tomey and Cruz, who only had, 500, 600 at bats. Nobody who played that long was anywhere near the hitter that Harmon was.
Yeah, and I'd add to that. I mean, he had more walks than strikeouts, or it was very close, almost a 1-to-1 ratio, walks to strikeouts, which just think about in that in today's game. I mean, there's guys like Luis Ariz that fit that category, but that's the type of hitter that happens with. Joe Mauer did that for a few years. Lamont Wade, that type of a hitter, not Killebrew, 500 and whatever home runs. I think 480 of which, or 475 of which were in a Twins uniform. I had Carew over Puckett just because when I did research for teams of the decades in the 1970s with the Twins in 9 seasons, he hit like 340 for the whole decade, which to me is just amazing. So Kirby Puckett was my guy growing up. I think we both have Mauer Oliva, Hrbek. Yep. And I don't think there's a lot of necessarily disagreement with that. I bet if you were to talk to my dad and he was listening to this, I don't know if he's listening to this, but if he is, he would probably put Oliva higher than Mauer. And I'm not going to make a big argument because, I mean, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And honestly, this is going to sound dumb for a guy we both agreed was number 6 on our list. Kent Hrbek probably goes underrated. He was another power hitter who was on some winning teams, both of them. And he had like 280 home runs in his career, and he walked a ton, and he'd probably be more appreciated now than he might have even been then.
Yep. He's kind of got he's got the longevity too. He was playing his whole career here. That's a lot of seasons that added up. He was on some terrible teams early, but then he's got 2 rings, like Puckett. I would say he's a very far step. Mauer and Oliva left him in the dust pretty easily. I would flip a coin between Mauer and Oliva, but Hrbek is a pretty significant step down from those 2.
Okay, then we have the 3 pitchers. So we started with 6 hitters each.
Yep.
You got 3 pitchers, and you've got Johan Santana, Jim Cott, Bert Blyleven. Can't argue too much. I have Blyleven, Cott, Santana.
Yep.
I think maybe that might be a discussion on peak value versus longevity.
Yep, and for me, it's almost more recognition because in hindsight, you look at some of Bert's best years, 73 and 74. He was putting up Johan numbers. I just don't think the public realized it, and they were kind of on middling Twins teams. If he put those years up in 2020, people wouldn't know what to do with themselves. Because of the innings, but the strikeout numbers and everything else. Johan was winning Cy Youngs. Finishing in the top 5 in Cy Youngs. Bert has very little of that on his resume.
Yeah, and I agree with that. At the same time, like you said, Blyleven's great years were very similar. And, you got to compare offensive numbers during those eras. Santana dominated during a very hitter-friendly decade.
Yeah.
Whereas Blyleven had a 2-something ERA in a league where, the league ERA was probably 3.0 or something like that. So, ultimately, look at Blyleven's WAR, and it is significantly higher than the others. And he did have the 2 stints. He wasn't quite as good the second stint, but he was still good. And then he became part of the winning team. So, it's tough. For me, I've always thought Cott is very underrated nationally. I think if they would have had awards in both leagues, he probably would have won a Cy Young in the American League. I think he lost 1 year to Sandy Koufax, kind of like Jim Mudcat Grant did 1 year too.
Yep. Both of them could have each. I think Cott was a shoe-in because he was Sporting News AL Pitcher of the Year that year, and if they're giving it to him, I would guess that the AL Cy Young would have gone his way, but there was only one, and Koufax won it unanimously. So Cott didn't even get any votes. You could only vote for first place. So Sandy took them all. So there's no like second place finish for Cy Young even that year.
Well, yeah, real quick, we got a comment from Ron Brown. Postseason results are hard to weigh in because the Yankees were always winning during the killer era, which is true.
Yeah.
Hard to disagree with that. The Twins did get to a World Series, and they were generally competitive a lot of those seasons after coming to Minnesota. So I think that's a fair point. I think that's a point that I like to make, and I'm kind of one of those bitter playoff people who are like, what happens in 162 games matters much more to me than a best of 5 series at the little tournament at the end of the year, when what matters is who's hot at the right time. That said, as you said, flags fly forever, and those are memories that you and I have of 87 and 91 that unfortunately people much younger than us, even 5 years younger than us, probably don't have, and hopefully we have again sometime soon.
Yeah, I mean, you keep crossing your fingers that you catch lightning in a bottle at some time. It just hasn't been rolling our way the last 20 years or so.
NWA Wiffle Ball says, I was going to add that the Yankees are just stellar. On a podcast, we don't want to be hearing that. All right, let's go. We got another question here from David Youngs, one of the Twins Daily writers. Chris, if Santana's entire career was taken into account, would you put him 7? And so he's including his time with the Mets. He threw a no-hitter with the Mets. He had one really good year after he joined the Mets, and then he started getting hurt, the shoulder issues. Eventually, I think he even had Tommy John. He kept trying to come back, and it just never happened. So really, you'd be adding one more pretty good year.
Yeah, 1.5 is kind of the way I remember it. But that would be close. I feel like I already gave Johan a pretty good bump just based on not having a lot of longevity, but would he top Herbeck? I could see that argument if you throw his Mets time in there, because he wasn't ever bad. He was just hurt, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. And it's funny because people think of him as this big strikeout pitcher. He did lead the league in strikeouts often. It's the other thing that's funny to me is Bert Blyleven was number 3 on the all-time strikeout list when he retired. So we think of him as this big strikeout pitcher, right?
Yeah.
His A per 9 was like 7.
Right.
Which in today's game would be mocked and ridiculed, but I think that speaks a lot more to the type of hitters, the power game now, all that kind of stuff. Hitters don't care if they strike out anymore these days. Real quick, Chris, let's get to our number 10 choices. You went with Frank Viola. I went with Bob Allison. There's a few other choices that could fit into that range as well. I feel like the top 9, I think a lot of people are going to agree with. 10 to 12, 10 to 14 range is pretty interchangeable, if you ask me.
I agree, and I went with the guy with the World Series MVP in my top 10, and you went with the guy who had a great catch in Game 2 of his World Series. So I mean, they both had a little bit of postseason heroics. Allison wasn't quite an important member by 69 and 70, and they lost all those games anyways in the ALCS, but. They both won some games, some big games, and they both had some peaks. Allison led the AL in OPS 1 year. I think runs maybe the same year.
Well, and he was top 10 in home runs, and I think RBIs like 5 or 6 of those years as well. The thing about, I'm not even arguing with Viola. Like you said, he's got the World Series MVP. He won a Game 7, and he also won a Cy Young the next year and had a great year. And he brought in trade Rick Aguilera, Kevin Tapani, and David West and like 3 other guys, and I think those guys, at least those first 2 we mentioned, might appear on this list as well. So let's continue here. I think for me, the fun stuff that I like doing, and I'd love to hear those that are listening their thoughts on this. Who would you rank higher, Jack Morris or Mudcat Grant? Now, without going through this, first of all, very important for the Twin Spotlight show. We have to welcome Chris by a message from Patrick. Hi, Max the Cat is back, and Max the Cat likes to say hi. So, hi, Chris. Hi, Max the Cat.
Sounds good.
All right, so we got that going for it. All right, Jack Morris or Mudcat Grant. Jack Morris was 18-12 with a good ERA in 1991. Kind of a return to form year for him. I mean, frankly, Scott Erickson was a better pitcher during the regular season than Jack Morris. So it'll be interesting to see how people would rank him and compared to Morris as well. Jack Morris has Game 7, which might be the greatest pitching performance in a clutch game in the history of not only baseball, but maybe any sport, you know. But Mudcat Grant, and here's my case for this. Mudcat Grant was very good for the Twins for 3 seasons. Mm-hmm. He, in 1965, was absolutely way better than Morris was for the Twins in the regular season in 1965. He had Game 6 of the 1965 World Series, and I like to mention to people, in that Game 6, not only did he get a complete game win over the Dodgers that forced a Game 7, he had a 3-run homer in that game to give himself some insurance. I think they won the game 5-1 or 5-2, but if not for Sandy Koufax being Sandy Koufax in Game 7, maybe Jim Mudcat Grant is a little higher on the list. And as I did on a radio interview today with Dave Overland in St. Cloud on WJON, we talked about his performance at the Killebrew Memorial. That brought us both to tears. So maybe that's why I have a soft spot for Mudcat Grant. This one definitely speaks to postseason.
Yep. It's just a matter of how much weight you want to put to it, doing it in a losing effort versus doing it in a winning effort, right? Like you said, they had similar postseason resumes. Morris pitched a little bit more just because there were 2 rounds in 91, and Mudcat only had the World Series to shine, but he shined with the bat too.
Right. So those of you watching, let's see it. We've got a mix so far. NWA Wiffle Ball says Jack Morris all day. David Young says Morris had a better career, but Grant had a longer career with the Twins.
Right.
So, yeah, it does definitely come down here. And NWA Wiffle Ball doubles down and says Jack Morris. Come on now. Any further thoughts on this? And I think this is a fair discussion because in fact, it was David Youngs that wrote an article about 2 or 3 weeks ago about that 1991 pitching staff where you had Jack Morris, Scott Erickson, and Kevin Tapani. And I believe all 3 of them appear somewhere on your top 60.
Yep.
My top 60 as well. Morris had the 1 year. Tapani was solid and really great in 91, but he was solid for about 4 years.
Right.
And Erickson was great in 1991, pretty good in 92, and then just, injuries kind of took him over until he ended up going with the Orioles for a while, and he kind of was up and down from there as well. But yeah, I mean, just speak to that 1991 pitching staff, which included Rick Aguilera, which is also on this list.
Yep. And for me with Morris, I don't know if you can win placing him wherever you're going to go. It could be argued that you're way off. I often will sort Twin stats by certain numbers, and he'll end up being ranked certain WAR calculations or whatever 100 spots differently than where I have him ranked, just because he wasn't here very long. And to be honest, I've had him in the same spot since I started, without giving away where it is. And I've moved people around him as they've gotten worse or better, just because it feels like he belongs in the top wherever I've got him, without saying exactly, what that is. But 1991, it's the best World Series that there's arguably ever been, and he pitched the biggest game of it, and he was flawless.
Well, to find out where Jack Morris and Mudcat Grant wind up on Chris's top 300 Twins prospect or Twins player rankings, you're going to have to go to Twins Daily or find a way to order the top 60 Twins in 60 seasons in Minnesota, which has been a big project the two of us have kind of worked on here over the last month or two. And it's a lot of fun that's come out today, and it's just $7.99. So I will tell you that Jack Morris is not on my top 60, but he'd be close. All right, let's go to the next one. This is one we've talked a little bit about, and I brought up a little bit in the article today, and I think this is a great conversation piece, and you could do this for every position. So you've got Randy Bush, who was with the organization for a dozen years, won 2 championships, and was a starter maybe half of the time. And he was a very good pinch hitter, probably the best pinch hitter in organization history. I don't know, Chip Hale maybe number 2, or who would even be number 2. Nelson Cruz has been great the last 2 years, but one of those seasons was a 60-game season. But the Twins did win division titles both years, and he won the Silver Slugger. Chili Davis, along with Jack Morris, helped the Twins to the 91 World Series and was great in 92 as well, posting OPS over 800 both of those seasons, providing power beyond Puckett and Herbeck on those teams. Molitor was on the team for 3 years. He won a Silver Slugger during that time and averaged he hit 312 over those 3 years. But again, just 3 years. Jason Kubel, I mean, to me, he's the biggest what could have been if not for that knee injury after his debut that September, and he got hurt in the Arizona Fall League. But even then, he had a very good career. So to me, this is a good discussion starter. Those of you listening, how would you rank this group? Or at least tell us who's number 1 in your group in terms of top Twins of all time. And Chris, what goes into your factoring for this? I know at least 2 of these guys, if not 3 of them, are in your top 60.
Yeah, and to be honest, they're all pretty close. I think if they're not in the top 60, they're just on the outside looking in. I would say the hardest part about this crew, which is something I ran into this year with Nelson Cruz, and to a certain extent, guys like Kenta Maeda, is what to do with guys who had dominant seasons in 2020. They get the accolades, they're getting MVP votes and Cy Young votes, but Nelson Cruz only had 180 at bats or something like that. So his resume for the Twins is it's 2 years, but I don't even know if he's at 600 at bats yet. So that was tough for me, and I probably shorted him. If he had 2 500 at bat seasons and put up the same numbers, I would probably have him 10 or 15 spots higher, and arguably, I don't have him at the top of this list, but he'd be close, I bet.
And real quick, again, just a reminder, my name is Seth Stohs of Twins Daily, along with Chris Talley, the originator, the developer of the top 300 Twins player rankings, which he, again, updates after every season. It's, like I said, it's something I look forward to every year. And for me, it's fun to see those players who are, ranked 198th or 237th too. Just, again, kind of remember, where's Rich Becker? Where's, Chuck Knobloch? Where is Paul Sorrento? And, who are some of the guys that are just off? For me also, where's Max Kepler? Where's Byron Buxton? Where are Jose Barrios? As these guys are now going into years 4 and 5 of their Twins tenure. I'll tell you one thing. There's a pitcher who pitched in September of 2019 and was on a trajectory the first half of this shortened 2020 season who did make the top 300 list. So, it's kind of fun, again, to do this. And we've got one more example after this. So, again, send us your thoughts. We got a little comment here. David recalls Rich Becker, former Fargo Moorhead Red Hawk. So a little extra trivia here for you. We got another one here. But, again, if you've got any questions or if you want us to compare, come up with a couple of names for us to kind of discuss and get your opinions, and we'll get the crowdsourced opinion as well. For me, this is tough. I put them in alphabetical order here, as you can tell. I actually did sneak 1, 2. I think I snuck at least 4 of them actually into this. So Ron Brown says I would go with Chili, but I'll have Merritt. So this is kind of a tough group. And again, do this for any position. You got Kent Herbeck at first base. You got Morneau at first base. Over time, Sano will probably show up there. So it'll be fun to kind of see where that plays out. In center field, you get Torrey Hunter and Kirby Puckett, and hopefully Byron Buxton's around for a little while and that kind of thing. So fun conversation. Now, I didn't do pictures on this page, but this is kind of where it gets to that next level. And this is, I'll ask Chris this. So the 4 players I have mentioned here, Greg Agney, Dean Chance, Eddie Guardado, Miguel Sano. 4 very different types of players, 4 players that are in both of our top 60s. But Greg Agney, a long-term shortstop, not known for his hitting, but he had a couple of pretty solid seasons at a position where very few shortstops hit. Eddie Guardado struggled as a starter, became a solid, dependable reliever for quite a few years without putting up great numbers for Tom Kelly, and then took over as the closer and had 2 dominant all-star seasons. Gene Chance was only in the organization for, I think, 3 seasons.
That's right.
20-win season in that time stretch, and was very good for, I think, all 3 of those years. And then Miguel Sano is going on year 5, I think, and he's had his injuries, but he is in the top 14 at age 26 or through his age 26 season in home runs. He's got 130 some. He's behind only Eddie Rosario, who we'll talk about in a minute too. But this is a tough list, and this kind of speaks to how do you go about even starting to compare this list?
Well, I will say that I started, if I tried to do this project in 1995 instead of 2005, it would have been impossible. But the boom of the internet, starting with Baseball Reference and then all the other sites that kind of sprung up around it, where you can actually sort by different things. And I created the spreadsheets from Baseball Reference at the start. It helps, and especially once the WAR calculations. And I had Bill James' book, WinShares book, that I pulled data from there on all the different Twins years, and different people assign value different ways. Those calculations are different, especially when in regards to pitching and defense. But I definitely used it as a guide. Where did one guy finish in win shares compared to another, especially if they had similar like that.
Yeah, and this is tough for me because, I remember Gagne, and it seemed like at that time people would talk about how he couldn't hit, and he never quite became what everyone hoped he would. But ultimately, he became a 265, 270 hitting shortstop with a low on-base percentage. But he would hit 25 doubles and 8 triples and 10 to, I think he had 18 home runs one year. So, that's not bad at all. 2 World Series. Eddie Guardado, again, struggled. But so for me, this is a tough one, but I think it's one that I think is a lot of fun to discuss. And for me, part of the fun of researching this was guys like Dean Chance, guys like Dave Boswell from that same general timeline, those 1967 to 1970 years where they were AL West, I suppose, champs a couple of years and ended up losing to the Orioles, who were obviously loaded as well. We got Ron Brown, who says he would go Gagne, Guardado, Sano, Chance. And I don't think we're surprised when NWA Wiffle Ball says Miguel Sano, baby. Let's talk another question, and this one's from David Young and Youngs, and he always asks the longest questions. David, you ask long questions. So now I have to read. Kent Herbeck mentions in his book how people often say that he could have made the Hall of Fame if he would have focused more on baseball or played longer. If you were to line up his career with Joe Mauer in the same time period, who has the better Hall of Fame chance? I'll let you answer that one, David. Chris first, David's question, and then I'll give it my thoughts.
So we're just looking at their Hall of Fame cases, one against the other.
One against the other, and I don't know how we do it, but pretend that they played at the same time period.
Oh, I think we kind of know because Morneau kind of was Herbeck. Morneau and Herbeck were very similar players, high average guys. Drew some walks, had some power, but they weren't, Nelson Cruz power, right? So they were going to hit 30 home runs, but they weren't going to hit 40. They drive in runs. And I would say Mauer has by far the better Hall of Fame case than Morneau, just because of peak, because those 3 batting titles and position matters. Mauer was the best catcher in the game for a decade. Herbeck and Morneau was one of the 8 or 9 best first basemen for a decade, right? There's just a lot better hitters at first base. Herbeck had Eddie Murray and, all the other great Don Mattingly, guys like that. That's why he doesn't have the Silver Sluggers and maybe some of the recognition that Mauer got is he was a great bat, but there are a lot of great bats at first base.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's the position scarcity is the thing. It's why I think Jeff Kent deserves more consideration for Hall of Fame because there aren't as many great second basemen. And third base is another position, but catcher certainly. And I mean, it was a big deal when Mauer won his first batting title, because I think in all of baseball history, there have been 6 batting titles won by catchers.
Yep.
And Mauer is 3 of them, and no one else in the American League. So I think Buster Posey won one a few years later. But
right, that's right.
But it was more than that. I think, fortunately, later in Mauer's career, people began to appreciate how important on-base percentage was. That is, yeah, well, some, and some still don't. So I don't know that we're going to transfer any of those over. But yeah, and I'm going to agree with David, who says never thought of that comparison between Morneau and Herbie. Good stuff. So I agree. I wouldn't have thought that quickly on my feet either, as far as comparing them. And Morneau did win an MVP, and he was on his way to another one the year of the concussion, and he had another strong year in there. If not for that concussion, he's got a pretty good Hall of Fame case, probably.
It's the story of the Twins of the last 20 years, whether it's Mauer, Morneau, Koski, Span. I mean, you don't think of baseball as the contact sport, but man, we've been snake bit with concussions.
Yeah, and I think Garver had one a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Real quickly, I want to talk just about the present players. We both had Eddie Rosario in our top 60 list. I had a question on the radio show earlier today that, we talk so much about like Eddie Rosario, who will probably be non-tendered by the Twins in the next 24 hours.
Yep.
Not for certain, but I think most people agree that that's the direction that will happen and probably should happen. But yet he's a top 60. And I want to say, without looking at the list in front of me over here, I think we both have him in the top 50.
Yep.
Of the Twins.
Yep.
And for us to just so cavalierly say, hey, yeah, we've got to non-tender this guy, we as in the Twins, it does kind of bite a little bit. He's had a good major league career, and maybe an underrated at this point career by some of the advanced statistical measure followers, myself included, in recent years.
He's a polarizing figure, right? I mean, a lot of people love him, a lot of people hate him, and I'm kind of the kind of guy who I love certain things he does. I hate, when he comes up and the first 3 guys have had six pitch at bats, and he swings at the first one and pops up to shortstop, you're tearing your hair out. But man, when he hits one off the wall with the bases juiced, and he can do some great things.
Those of you that follow me on Twitter, I'm sure you will appreciate me just posting this. It didn't go through. So I'm just going to have to say it. Have I ever mentioned how much I enjoy watching Eddie Rosario play baseball? Because I do. I think he's fantastic to watch. I just think with Larnach and Kirilloff and Rooker all in the picture at $500,000 or $600,000 over the next few years, paying him $8 to $12 million probably doesn't make a lot of sense when you can use that money, hopefully for something else. But
yeah,
and I think he's been very good, and he's had 5 really average to above average, to significantly above average, especially with some of the counting numbers. So I think in 10, 15 years, people will appreciate a little bit more what Eddie Rosario is and has been. Miguel Sano, another one that I think is in both of our top 60 lists. I think I have him well higher than you because of so many home runs, but that's another one. And I know we've talked about, again, Buxton, Barrios, Kepler, Cruz, if he sticks around. Are there any other Twins players that you think are on that cusp of top 60-dom or even maybe top 100?
Another guy who's possibly going to be non-tendered tomorrow is Taylor Rogers, and I have him he's in my top 120. So I mean, he's close, and he may be gone in a day. I mean, who knows? I'm not as certain what they're going to do with him, but people wouldn't be shocked if they let him go.
There is going to be, by the way, a off-season live podcast or show tomorrow night with Nick Nelson, myself, and I think David Youngs is in on that one as well, where we'll talk about the Twins' decisions on I just realized that I think I used the wrong link for this. I might have used, man, I'm not the smartest person you'll ever meet. So yeah, I think we're going to have another off-season live tomorrow night. Hopefully you'll be able to watch that. We'll talk about Eddie Rosario. We'll talk about Taylor Rogers and other decisions that are going to be made here in the next 24 hours. But Chris, I guess any final thoughts that you've got on not only the book, the top 60 Twins players and 60 seasons in Minnesota. And again, the links are available at twinsdaily.com. Check my Twitter feed and you'll be able to find that. I've enjoyed this project, Chris, no matter how many we sell or don't sell. Ultimately, it's been a great time. Hopefully you've enjoyed doing this as much as I've enjoyed kind of researching it. Any final thoughts for those that are interested in purchasing this book or Twins history?
It's fun to do. I looked at these numbers for a long time without really a purpose in mind, and having a place to kind of throw them down on, well, kind of paper, ebook, but close enough, and having other people take a look at them it's fun, and it's an exciting process. So I want to thank Seth again for looping me in on this project, and hope people will read it and enjoy it.
Again, $7.99 electronic book for immediate download, available right now. The top 60 Twins players and 60 seasons in Minnesota, 1961 to 2020. I want to thank Chris. It's been a lot of fun for me. I want to thank everyone for listening here tonight live, sending in your comments, your questions, and anyone who's listening to the podcast. Remember, this is available on Twins Daily, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and you'll be able to listen to those places. We'll also put it on the Twins Daily podcast, and that should be available shortly for you to download wherever you download your podcast. With that, again, I want to thank Chris and thank everybody. You guys have yourself a great night. Off-season live tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Be sure to listen in on that, and thanks again, and go Twins.